Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Institute of Politics Speaker Series event, Democracy at a Crossroads, What Americans Can Learn from Hungary. My name is Megan Aholbe. I'm a fourth year in the college, majoring in public policy and psychology, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. It is my honor tonight to introduce our guests. Ambassador David Pressman served as a U.S. ambassador to Hungary from 2022 to 2025. He has also formerly served as Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security and as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations Security Council. He is currently an IOP Pritzker Fellow, and as one of his ambassadors, I've had the opportunity to attend all of his amazing seminars thus far, where we have gotten into discussions about U.S. aid shutdown and its consequences, Viktor Orban's Hungary and democratic collapse, and the use of litigation against authoritarian reach across borders. George Packer is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He writes about American politics and culture, as well as U.S. foreign policy. He's the author of 10 books and will be coming out with a novel on imperial collapse titled The Emergency later this year. The conversation tonight will be moderated by IOP founding director David Axelrod. Before we get started tonight, we ask that you please silence your phones. After the conversation, we will have time for Q&A. There will be a microphone placed in the audience, and students will be given priority for the first questions. A few upcoming events. This Friday at 9:30 a.m. at the IOP, the International Policy Program will present From Discord to Democracy, How Gen Z is Shaping Nepal's New Government. For students in the room, we encourage you to join IOP's Break Up with Social Media Challenge the week of November 10th. Instead of doom scrolling all week, join us in person to build community and engage with issues you care about. Visit politics.uchicago.edu for more. And now, please join me in welcoming Ambassador David Pressman, George Packer, and David Axelrod.
I could not think of more appropriate walk-on music for the three of us.
Exactly.
But I should have worn spandex.
You know, next time, David.
You wouldn't want that. You don't have to. This isn't call and response here. Come on.
I like the way this is starting.
Well, first of all, let me say that in 1962, President Kennedy assembled, I think, 48 Nobel Prize winners in the stateroom of the White House, which still exists, I'm told. And he said, this is the greatest assemblage of genius and talent that has ever been together since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone. So I feel that way with these guys. We're here to discuss a serious, very serious topic, which is the state of liberal democracy as seen through the eyes of someone who served in Hungary and someone who thinks about these topics and writes about them. And I can't think of two better people to engage in this topic. And I want to thank you for being a fellow at the IOP this quarter as well. So, David, let's start with you, because Viktor Orban is a vivid and interesting character here, because he started off as a young firebrand anti-Soviet kind of democratic reformer, and that his party was committed to that. Talk, if you can, just give us the top line on the journey and who Viktor Orban is today.
Yeah, no, thank you. You're right. I mean, Orban started, and in fact, a lot of his political mythology to this day in Hungary remains rooted in the fact that as the communist regime was retreating from Hungary, Orban was seen as someone who famously gave the speech, "Ruski's haza," Russians go home. And I think that what Orban has really played on over these years to much political success has been this idea of himself as a freedom fighter, of himself as a fighter of standing up for Hungarian sovereignty in the face of marauding outside forces, whether they be the communist regime or now today Brussels and Ursula von der Leyen, who are somehow seeking to interfere or invade in Hungary's sovereignty. So you have a leader of Hungary, Prime Minister Orban, who went from being a George Soros-supported freedom fighter and a liberal to what is clearly a very authoritarian, illiberal model that he boasts about.
Yeah. We'll get into how that happened and why that happened and how it has been executed, which I think is most relevant here. George, you wrote this book, we were talking about it in the green room, called The Last Best Hope, America in Crisis and Renewal, and you wrote it in late 2021.
Yeah. Things have changed a little since
yes.
those months. Yeah.
Yes, and you wrote a piece in the Atlantic where your work is seen just recently called America's Zombie Democracy, which seems slightly less hopeful a title. And
I've been accused of being a downer for about 12 years now. And all I can say is I'm just sort of writing what I see. And I wrote America's Zombie Democracy in a state of semi-despair after 8 months of what took Orban 10 years, 14 years?
14 to 15 years.
Well, we're not there yet, I think you would agree, but we're well on the road, and maybe because Orban had drawn the map, had shown the way, it's easier for strongmen today to do what he did because they see how it works in the modern age. We're well on the way after 8 or 9 months. And what I was thinking of with that piece was, where are the remaining checks on presidential power? Because you could say this great metaphysical question, are we still a democracy? What are we? Have we crossed a line? Where is the line? It's very hard to say, and probably was hard to say in Hungary too, because this is not January 1933. But when you look at where the checks are, in case after case, institution after institution, they have collapsed. They've failed to check, or they've become accomplices. And so it struck me that the final one being public opinion, elections, that may be the last barrier. And will it be a free and fair election is, for me, a live question.
We'll get into all of that, but let's talk about some of the elements of what you saw in Hungary and the Orban story. And we should point out that that President Trump has often pointed to Orban as kind of a model. I mean, he holds him up as a model, and he is emblematic of what is not just Trump and Orban, but a movement toward illiberal democracy throughout Europe and other places. So, but I want to focus on a few aspects of this. Talk about what Orban did relative to the media in Hungary. You know, the First Amendment of our Constitution is very deliberate in including freedom of the press, because the Founding Fathers thought people need to know what's going on in their own government. But Orban has, will you tell him?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, I would note as well in terms of the Trump relationship, just as a flag, that President Trump has purportedly invited Prime Minister Orban to the Oval Office this coming week. So the relationship is a close one, and we can talk about the political imagination associated with Viktor Orban and the conservative movement, including this in this country, and how that holds up as we go along. But in response to your question about the media, look, the media in Hungary is controlled 85% by a single political party. And how that came about is through a process of effectively elite capitulation, where a group of oligarchs who were loyal to Viktor Orban bought up the media assets They then generously contributed those assets to a single foundation that is run and controlled by Fidesz, the political party of Viktor Orban. And on a regular basis, the media outlets get direct editorial direction from the Hungarian government. So as the United States ambassador, when I read the Hungarian press, I was reading it as if I were reading a government press release. And then in addition to that, on the negative side, all aspects of state power were used and continue to be used to harass, to intimidate, and to silence remaining independent media outlets. So the use of tax investigations, regulatory authorities, where you see licenses, for instance, for the sole remaining independent public radio station in Hungary being revoked. Yeah. So you end up in an environment where you're actually able to send political messages really intensively across all mediums very quickly.
And you actually you were a target.
I was a feature of the Hungarian News Daily.
I mean,
yes.
part of Orban's politics is anti-gay.
Yeah.
You were a gay man. You came with your family to Hungary. Those media outlets were consistently after you.
Unflattering.
Unflattering, yes. That's very diplomatic of you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, look, the front page of the Hungarian newspaper, this is not an overstatement, every single day for close to 3 years had me on it, every single day. In fact, there was a ticker, it's Magyar Nemzet is the name of the paper. There was a ticker at the top where there were basically 4 options that you could click on. One was rolling dollars, which was an expression to refer to the purported use of US dollars to buy up media and fund the opposition in Hungary. The other was a famous Hungarian soccer player. I don't remember what the third was, but the final one was me. And I would just note, David, on the gay thing, which is important, you know, they certainly use the fact that I'm a gay man to try to undermine me and marginalize me in the eyes of Hungarian citizens and otherwise. But their motivation for doing that was because, in my view at least, was because I was, and the Biden administration was speaking clearly on a host of issues unrelated to that.
No, absolutely. George, I'd like to say when David describes that scenario that could never happen here. But I remember when Donald Trump met with Leslie Stahl right before he became president the first time, she asked him, why are you always picking on the media? Why are you going after the media the way you are, this fake news stuff? And he said, because I don't want them to believe you when you say negative things about me.
Yeah.
And he's been pretty effective.
Well, he began calling us the enemy of the American people in his first term, which was...
I think he meant that in a nice way.
Yeah. That's sort of out of Stalin. I mean, it was a weird thing to hear as an American. The enemy of the people? Who says that? What president says that? So that was early, and it was disorienting because no one in that position had said anything close. Nixon had said, yeah, they're a bunch of liars, I hate them, but the enemy of the people.
Every president has those moments. Most of them don't say it out loud.
They just don't say it out loud, but he says it out loud intentionally and quite successfully because he wants to put the media in the category of an elite, a privileged elite, who speak for no one but themselves, who are self-interested, who are corrupt, who lie, and who are defending other corrupt interests. And over here are the good American people. So once you've got us in that corner, which is what populists do, they point to the elites, whether they're academic, media, arts, corporate, whatever. Sometimes it's deserved.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you.
Yeah, sometimes it's deserved.
Is there not some part of that that is deserved?
It wouldn't work if it weren't partly deserved.
Yeah.
The legacy media, which has become an insult, made a lot of mistakes and became complacent. And kind of almost lost faith in ourselves, I would say. The internet was a profoundly unsettling experience for journalists of my
Yes.
generation. So Trump understood that we were already on our back foot,
Yeah.
and that there was all this new media coming up, which I would say is less reliable, more partisan, et cetera, but which he could point to and say, those are the real voices of the people, whereas these legacy media people are a bunch of corrupt elites. And again, there was enough truth for it to
Yeah.
stick. So now we have the Hungarian scenario. A couple of little islands, the New York Times, owned by a family that's not going to cave to Trump. The Atlantic, owned by a wealthy woman who's not going to cave to Trump. But when you look beyond that, even the Washington Post, a great newspaper, has begun to backpedal because it's owned by a guy,
Who has
Jeff Bezos,
yes,
with a lot
has
of
a few
interest.
business interests.
Few business interests. Look at the new media, the supposedly independent, brave, rambunctious new media. They've all fallen into line.
Well, let me just expand on that,
yeah.
and I want to ask you about this. We've seen the sale of Paramount and CBS to Larry and David Ellison, the Ellisons from Oracle,
Yeah.
allies of Trump. They now may buy CNN, in which case I may have more time to moderate discussions like this.
I think they'll always need you to be that elite who they can put. Of course,
Just
they
what you
are
want.
the
Just what
biggest
you want
elite.
to
Well,
be.
flattering depiction.
Yeah. No, but they're the biggest.
but they
That's the
also
thing.
be-
They are the elites now. They are the powerful elite, but they will continue to use that term of abuse for their political enemies.
But they're also, and maybe even more significantly, like if I asked young people in this audience, and you know who you are, how many of you get your news from legacy media versus TikTok, X, and other forms of social media? I know what the answer is because I've asked the question, and I've seen the polling on this as well. Now Trump has cut them in on the TikTok deal. Elon Musk, although their relationship is weird, as is Elon, is an ally most of the time. He owned those two entities, X and TikTok. They talk to a lot of people every day, many of them young.
And Facebook has pretty much capitulated. So, and I think TikTok is more important than CBS, and the Ellison stake in TikTok
Yes.
is potentially more consequential. That would give that family of cronies of the president the kind of control over the media that is actually influential in this country, along the lines of what Orban's cronies have in Hungary.
Can just for a minute, just to go back to the enemy of the people thing, because there's something in addition to framing them as elites that I think President Trump has done, certainly Viktor Orban has done with respect to his attacks on the media, is it's actually attacking this idea that there is such a thing as independent media. The idea that there ever could be independence, if everyone is a political actor, if the independent media is just the arm of the opposition, they're just doing politics just like I'm doing politics. So there's no independent media, there's no independent university, there's no independence. And so what you have is, in addition to what you just described, George, which is casting them as elites, you're casting everyone as just playing politics.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you say there's no reality?
Yeah.
And that's where it leads.
Except the
where it
one
leads.
that I'm sharing. I mean, not me.
Right.
But I'm now playing the role of the president. I mean, he has his own version. You know, we all laughed when Kellyanne Conway said 2 days after the day after the inauguration, a few days after the inauguration, when the president was insisting that the crowd at the inauguration was the largest ever. And, there was visual evidence that that wasn't true. And Chuck Todd said to her on Meet the Press, well, that's not a fact. And she said, well, he has alternative facts. Yes, and people laughed. But that was a really significant statement.
It was.
When you look back at it.
And if the names Hannah Arendt and George Orwell, if you had $1 for every time they're invoked these days, you could make a pretty good sum just from those two. Hannah Arendt said and wrote that the purpose of lying is not to try to convince people that your lies are true. This is when it's coming from power, but to convince people that they never know, that maybe who knows what the truth is, and so they give up trying to find it, and they become passive and acquiescent, because it takes a sense that you can find reality and have a common understanding with your fellow citizens to make you an active participant in democracy. But once you decide, who the hell knows? They all lie. That's when Trump wins, when a populist demagogue wins.
Yeah.
And I think in this country, there are some who believe that when the economic consequences of this administration's policies are felt most acutely to Americans, that somehow there'll be a political shift. But I will just offer from the Hungarian perspective, I mean, Hungary is the poorest country in the European Union. It is the most corrupt country in the European Union. And yet, by virtue of this 85% control of the media that we described, and a message which is Viktor Orban's message is no war, no migration, no gender, he has been able to convince a portion of Hungarian society that the reason why their economy is where it is not because of anything that they've done, but because of these outside forces that he's protecting them from. I don't think we're far off from that possibility here of Americans being told a narrative about why the pain that they're experiencing economically is not the consequence of a policy of the U.S. government and the U.S. present administration.
Yeah. There's an election next year in Hungary.
Yeah.
There's a potent force, a guy who left the party of Orban and is now waging a kind of reform campaign against him. They drew a huge crowd on Hungarian Independence Day last week. He's now getting the treatment in their media every single day. But how much of a chance do you give his party of actually winning that election, or winning enough seats so as to weaken Orban?
So without question, the candidate you're mentioning is a fellow named Peter Magyar, and without question, this is the most competitive moment in Hungarian politics in 14 years. And I'm not going to wade into the likelihood that he's going to succeed or not succeed, but what I will say is that one thing that's interesting about Peter Magyar is he, as you note, he came from inside, and the whole message of his political campaign has been about corruption. And one reflection I had...
Echoes of Navalny.
Indeed. And before I was going to Hungary, the conventional wisdom and the advice I got from the foreign policy elite and the Hungary watchers were Hungarians don't care about corruption. They're used to corruption. They expect their government to be corrupt. The last government was corrupt, this government's corrupt. Corruption is not a winning or an important topic to Hungarians. That proved to be dead wrong, because here comes Peter Magyar, who links the fact and the acts of gross corruption and kleptocracy that's happening in Orban's government to the lived experience of Hungarians. I mean, he's going around the country and saying, you want to know the reason why your schools are in such shambles, it's because these people are stealing from you. And that message has galvanized Hungarians in a remarkable way. Now, will he succeed or will he not remains to be seen, but it's something that, competition in a political process is important, and obviously there is some.
We'll get back to this. I want to talk about other institutions, the courts, the legal profession there, the rule of law. Because obviously that's a concern here as well. But what did Orban do relative to that? He purged the courts and appointed his own people, but just elaborate a little on that.
Well, again, and this is also, I think, important for Americans as they look at their own experience in this country, because the actions that Prime Minister Orban took were not extra legal. In many cases, they were within the legal system. So with respect to the courts, they had a supermajority. They were able to modify the laws in Hungary to raise...
Constitution, right?
And modify the Constitution. They modified the Constitution, I think, over 20 times. And they modified the rules such that raising the mandatory retirement age, lowering the mandatory retirement age for judges on the bench, which meant all of these judges had to leave the bench. They then appointed all of their own people to the bench, and then what did they do? They went through the legal process and raised the mandatory retirement age. So again, utilizing legal process and legalism to have an effect that is,
and did it have the desired effect in terms of how the courts function?
But even yes. But I think in some ways more important when looking at the rule of law in Hungary is a recognition that what the government has done is push everything into extra legal and informal terrain. So the courts actually become subject to the political pressure that we're describing. So the media control, I mean, when I met as US ambassador with 2 leading judges in Hungary, these 2 judges were put on the front page of every single news outlet for 3 months and ridiculed as foreign agents and traitors and what have you. The message was there's, I think, 3,000 judges, I believe, in Hungary, and every single one of those judges got the message to a person that if they are seen with someone, a country, an individual who is raising questions about rule of law in Hungary, that they too will be targeted. So, they both had the legal take, but they also just applied enormous political pressure to render.
And the last question, because I want to get over to George, because this is obviously on people's minds here, but what about the sort of execution of the law? I mean, what we've seen here are sort of retributive, retribution sorts of prosecutions, which the president's very open about. But has the law been used that way to pressure opponents? And
oh, for sure. I mean, on a routine basis. The one thing that is off limits for the prosecutor general is anything involving financial crimes associated with Viktor Orban, his family, or his political party. And the one thing that is very much high on the agenda is very clearly independent media organizations, activists, and dissidents. So
and funders of them.
Well, they've attempted to construct a story that there are all of these, I think you're referencing George Soros, and certainly George Soros has been used as a trope by Viktor Orban politically as someone who's, attempting to overthrow the Hungarian government. And so they created an agency called the Sovereignty Protection Office, and they gave this agency power to use the intelligence services to investigate anyone who's articulating views that are consistent with a foreign government or foreign entity, which of course is any view. And who does the Sovereignty Protection Office investigate? They don't investigate people who are, aligned or working with Russia or with China, or they investigate entities who are aligned with Brussels or Washington. So the first organization that they investigated was Transparency International, after Transparency International described Viktor Orban's son-in-law becoming one of the richest people in Hungary. So it's not that sophisticated, really.
George, does any of this sound familiar to you?
Well, the thing that is striking is Hungary, before Orban turned it into an illiberal democracy, had been a democracy for about 30 years, 35 years. We've been one for almost 250 years.
They're going to have a big thing next year.
I think so. I'm sure there will be parades of tanks down Constitution Avenue. And yet, Americans in the key positions have given way more quickly or as quickly as the Hungarians in key positions.
Yes, for sure.
And with less intimidation, I would say, with less of a real, no one has a gun to their head in these positions of power. What they have is fear of somehow losing a piece of their power, of their wealth, of their status to their rivals, to their competitors.
Power in the case of Congress.
In the case of Congress, they've essentially surrendered their Article I power. In the case of many law firms, many corporations, And some universities, they have scrambled to avoid getting in the crosshairs rather than seeing that this is a long-term danger for the institutions that they represent, and that what they need to do is realize there's more safety in numbers, in cooperation with each other, in coming to some kind of consensus among themselves, like the 9 universities who were targeted with the compact that the White House drew up here. You do all these things, and some of them were straight at academic freedom, others were more about certain policies, and some of them seemed rather maybe legit. But if you give in when the administration is threatening you with cutting off your federal funding, you will be giving in forever. So why did they? Why haven't they stood up more?
It took 9 years for Viktor Orban to effectuate his takeover of the Hungarian universities. And within months, President Trump has managed to get some of our primary elite universities to capitulate. It's remarkable.
And I should add, not all of them.
Not all of them.
Not all.
Yes. Yeah.
Not all.
Not all of them.
But we're not through this yet.
No, I understand.
But the question is why?
Well, why don't you talk about why Orban seized? I mean, and he, I think, has been maybe even more aggressive in some ways than Trump about taking over these universities, albeit more slowly. But talk about what happened there.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it almost through a narrative of combating woke ideology, there was an effort to take universities and move them to what are called public interest foundations. But really, what this was public universities with public assets, in many cases, a lot of assets, would be transferred to these new foundations called public interest foundations. And then the prime minister would appoint for lifetime tenure the board of directors of those foundations being Fidesz party loyalists. And so what you had effectively done is moved all of the public assets from all these universities from the public hands to a single political party. And when I talked—
How did that affect what happened on these campuses?
I think, and I spent a lot of time on campuses, it is hard to have a comfortable sense of academic freedom, especially in certain issue areas, if you know that you are controlled and owned by a government who is prepared to use the immense resources of state to target anyone who speaks on the wrong side of those issues. But in some ways, the thing that surprised me the most, David, is when I would speak to the rectors and the deans privately of what are now captured universities in Hungary, they would describe the process of going through effectively the capitulation. And the words that they would use to describe why they voted to move to a public interest foundation are not at all dissimilar to the words that you hear today from the leadership of American universities. We need the resources. We're doing important work. Alzheimer's. It's the same thing repeating itself.
Well, one of the things that has been made very clear, and we've been lucky as a country in that people with power generally have taken their constitutional responsibilities seriously, understood them. But if you're willing to use every bit of leverage of the federal government in order to impose your political will, there's a hell of a lot of leverage there. I mean, Nixon toyed with it, and the nation recoiled from that. And that was a time when, even people of his own party were willing to go to him and say, no more. We don't see that now.
That goes back to what I think is the disappearance of truth. When the smoking gun tape was released in August of '74, proving that Nixon had been at the heart of the cover-up, which he'd been denying all along, the most conservative senators and editorialists didn't say, that's a hoax, it's it's a conspiracy, it's a fake. They went to Nixon and said, you got to leave. Today, what would happen? It would be part of the same.
Let me ask you a question about this, George, because
Yeah.
I think about this often. If Richard Nixon had the media environment that we have today, and access to social media, and access to support from Fox News, which is a powerful communications tool to his base, are you certain that the outcome would have been the same?
Not certain, because there's still Congress, and there were Republicans in Congress who were willing to investigate the president of their own party. The Supreme Court voted 9-0 that Nixon had to release the tapes as part of the evidence in a criminal case. Could there possibly be a 9-0 vote against Trump on something as crucial as that? I think the institutions across the board have lost some of the integrity that they had in the early 70s. And then there's the public. The question is, would the public be so polarized and so mutually distrustful and contemptuous that anything their media said to them they would believe, which was not quite true back then. There was still this legacy media called Walter Cronkite, who had the ability to some degree to speak to the broad middle.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were a broad middle back then. I don't think it would have worked, even if Nixon had TikTok and X on the side.
Yeah. No, I think if there was TikTok and X, there wouldn't have been Walter Cronkite. That's part of the problem.
Right.
Is that we are, we are so sort of fractionalized by the media environment that we don't have one discussion. But the thing that gives Trump the power that he has, because he's bumping along in the mid-40s as an approval rating, not high, but he has absolute command with his base.
Yeah.
And is willing, as I said, to use any point of leverage. So, and I'm sure Orban would as well, if someone, 89% of the House of Representatives today on the Republican side have voted with Trump 100% of the time.
I get that.
It's sort of striking. It's never, as Trump would say, you've never seen anything like it before. And it goes to a thing that I've always said, which is there's a reason why profiles in courage was such a slim volume. Politicians don't like to give up their...
It's death. It seems like death to lose an election, and I understand the leverage he has over his party. What is his leverage over Mark Zuckerberg, or over Jeff Bezos, or Skadden Arp's law firm? It seems to me that they have given him something to do with it. But they've given him leverage by acquiescing in advance. And the why question I asked you earlier is, for me, a big one. What is it that has led wealthy and powerful people to capitulate and not understand the stakes, or maybe even understand the stakes and do it anyway?
Well, there's an interesting phenomenon that I think is happening, where some of the entities, including law firms in particular, who are cutting deals with the Trump administration, they explain the deal as, well, we're just agreeing to do stuff that we would already do anyway, right? The term of the deal commits us to doing pro bono work. We would be doing pro bono work anyway. So there's almost this sort of self-confidence that we're so clever that we're going to outfox this guy, and we'll enter the deal, but we're just actually agreeing to. But what it ignores is it ignores the fact that just the terms of the deal don't matter. It's just the act of entering the deal, the act of capitulating, of demonstrating that you're prepared to concede, that offers the strong man, be it Viktor Orban or be it Donald Trump, the kind of control that they seek.
David, earlier today I was with my friend who's here, Tenny Gross, who runs the Institute for Nonviolence in Chicago, and they have this huge outreach program where they have former criminals, people out of jail who have become their
violence interrupters.
Yeah, their staff who go out and try to prevent or
and very
tamp
successful.
down. Yes. So I spent an hour with a group of these guys and women, and their courage was incredible. They don't even talk about being courageous. They're just going out into their community. But think of the courage it takes to go to where there's violence and try to get people to calm down and to not be violent. And Tenney said, yeah, this is part of democracy. And it occurred to me that's true. They are trying to hold on to or create the conditions where you can be a citizen of a democracy and participate at the most basic level, to not be afraid to send your kids out onto the street. And where is that courage when it comes to the heads of these institutions? And I have this feeling that they don't, and this is an American problem, we haven't had this threat. We have no memory of such a threat. We don't understand, or some of us don't understand, what's at stake and how precious a thing it is and how easily lost. People who've lived under dictatorships say to us, you have no idea how quickly this can go and how long it will take to get it back.
Let me ask you, and you wrote some about this in your book. You know, when we talk about how Donald Trump didn't invent this environment. He was brilliant. You said reptilian genius, but he's brilliant at exploiting the environment.
Yes.
And but the environment is real. There is a, and this is true not just in the United States. It's true in Hungary. It's true in other countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world. As the economies of the world have changed, as climate change has made migration accelerate, and all of this. There is a sense that the system isn't working for a lot of people. And that created an opportunity. So talk a little bit about that, you know, because I do want to, I think it's too easy for us to sit up here and say, you know, and sort of talk about Trump, Orban, and so on. What are the conditions that allow them to prosper politically?
You are so right to say that. I wrote a book called The Unwinding some years ago. It was before Trump. And people said, oh, you predicted Trump. No, I didn't see him coming, but I just went out and saw the landscape that a Trump could exploit. Because that's what he did. He exploited something. Loneliness. I wasn't looking for it. Everyone I profiled in that book was sort of cut off from institutions, from church, from union, from school, even from their own family. Obviously, deindustrialization and the hollowing out of all these towns and cities in the heartland, in rural areas, all the old clubs, the Rotary Club, and the pillars of the community who led the Rotary Club were gone, leaving behind boarded up storefronts. I saw this everywhere, and all you have to do is leave any big, wealthy metropolitan area and go about 10 miles, and you start to see this landscape all over the country. And then there's distrust of the powerful in Washington and in New York, a sense that they're in cahoots with each other, that it's all rigged, that it's against the little guy.
Which is not crazy.
Not crazy. None of this is crazy. What's destructive is when a politician sees the opportunity to feed these resentments, maybe even exaggerate them in order to get power for himself, not to solve their problems, because Trump is not doing that, but to get power for himself. So that, it is too easy to just cry, protect our democracy. We have to do two things at once, and it's really hard. One is protect our democracy, prevent it from being taken. But the other is face that there's a lot that is more than just wrong, but that is almost fatally wrong, that we've allowed to kind of persist over the decades, the rather complacent decades following the end of the Cold War, that have to be addressed, like the problems of crime in Chicago, or else we're not going to be able to prevent Trump or a successor from exploiting them.
And those two things are related, right? I mean, I think that one of the things dynamics that's happening in this country is that you asked, why are elites capitulating? Well, I think one story that elites tell themselves in the United States is this is going to pass, that we can keep our heads down, and in 3 years, this will be over. But I think that denies the reality, which I think you're rightly raising, that there's a third of this country that feels really disconnected and disenfranchised from the United States government, at least.
At least. And elites are disconnected from them.
100%.
Exactly. There was
It's a movement.
I think that they know that. I've said this before, and if any of you were at the event on Wednesday or Thursday, whenever it was, Monday, I was eventually going to land on the right day. No, it wasn't Monday. Anyway, Sarah McBride, I said that, I tell my Democratic friends, like, you approach people like missionaries and say, we're here to help you become more like us, and we know what you need and we're fighting for what you need. And it's sort of laden with disrespect for people who actually help make the country go.
Right.
And deserve respect. And so this detachment is real, but it's not just in America. That's the point. It's in Hungary. You see Nigel Farage in Britain rising up, and the base of his support is outside of the city of London, and people who feel like what happens there, all that prosperity has lent itself to their kind of unraveling.
Basically, the West, in country after country, all the momentum is with right-wing populists. And the center-left parties, the Social Democrats or the Democratic Party here, seem to have lost their way. David, what is the way for the Democratic Party?
Good question.
Wait a second, I'm the moderator.
Okay.
Well, part of the way is recognition. I mean, listen, and there are people here who are supporters of Donald Trump, I'm sure. And they may come to the microphone and ask questions. But I mean, my personal view is that there are things that he's done that needed to be done, that there was bureaucracy that was failing and unnecessary. I think that Washington needed an angioplasty. It just didn't need a heart attack. So I think what I tell my Democratic friends is, yeah, he's doing a tear down. The question is, what are you going to build? What are you going to build? Are you going to build something that is actually responsive to the lives of people who now feel so disconnected from their own government? Are you going to build something that is more impervious to the corruption of big money and willing to stand up to it and put the national interest first? Or are you just restoring what was your offer, that you're going to restore what he tore down? Right. And if that's the case, I think that's not a way forward, because people weren't enamored of what was there.
Right.
So if you're like, let's go back to what wasn't working, that's like I'm telling you as a political strategist, that's a bad strategy.
It's interesting, during the campaign last year, the question, is our democracy under threat? It got equal numbers of yes responses from both parties, but with completely different meanings, I think. But it still tells you exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something, and I said this all during the campaign, and I'll say it now. As profound as the challenges that we are now facing, and we in the city of Chicago are seeing one face of it with the current presence of ICE and the mayhem that has ensued. But if you're talking about democracy over the kitchen table, first of all, you're probably not eating at a kitchen table, you're probably eating at a dining room table. But you also probably aren't worried about the cost of the food on your table. You're probably not worried about the cost of your rent or your mortgage or your health care. If those things are a persistent worry. If you're working 2 and 3 jobs and your kid's living in your basement because they can't find work, and you're thinking about their future and you have doubts about it, you don't have the luxury to, I mean, it's a luxury to think about that. Now, I think that the connection has to be made between a better future and the survival of democracy, but it's not if people feel democracy has failed them.
Right.
And so I think that's the missing link.
Yeah, I agree.
So, sorry, we're just having this conversation. But I should throw it back to, well, let me just, before I leave this, there was a thought on the table here that I could not, that's similar to this, because I want to be fair about how we think about this. George, you got into hot water around in the whole sort of frenzied period about cancel culture and so on, because you and others wrote a letter that wasn't well received, perhaps not in rooms like this. Talk a little bit about that, because the truth is, as with all of this, some of the issues that were, I'd like to believe the University of Chicago has been as strong on free expression as any place in the country, but the issues that were raised were valid questions, so raise them.
It was the summer of 2020. The country seemed to be...
He always starts like a writer.
It was a dark and stormy night. The country was in a state of ferment, turmoil, and there was it was obvious that there was cancel culture on the right, because, and we see it now every day, you're not allowed to speak an ill word about Charlie Kirk, or else your livelihood is going to be threatened by the vice president. But anyone who is in an institution of culture, whether it's the media, academia, philanthropy, the arts, law firms, not culture but business, corporations, knew that there was just a kind of atmosphere of self-censorship. People were terrified of saying the wrong thing, because there were examples of people who were getting canceled, basically fired, for things that a month earlier would have gone unnoticed, because suddenly, not state power, but the power of society, the power of disapprobation, which in some ways can be more powerful. If your friends and colleagues are telling you you're a bad person, it can be more effective than the state saying, we're going to come after you. So a group of us wrote a letter that we got 150 people to sign. That was the key. The signatories were from across the spectrum, from Noam Chomsky and Margaret Atwood, Wynton Marsalis, to conservatives, to centrists, to center-left. It was across the board. The one group we had a hard time with were people under 35, because this felt like a generational rebellion was going on at that time. And that letter was published in Harper's. It became known as the Harper's Letter. And it was immediately the target of just tremendous anger and mockery, because apparently we were a bunch of elitists. See, this is the word that is so powerful.
Well, you probably were.
We were total elites.
That's why
we weren't doing it for ourselves, by the way.
Yeah.
Because most of us had positions that somewhat insulate. We were doing it for the assistant professor and the just hired fact checker who had no power at all, and who were feeling this atmosphere closing in on them from the left. And the left went after this letter, and that's part of the game. You have to be ready for that. What's interesting is how, at that time, remember, it was the right, it was Elon Musk, it was J.D. Vance, who were all for free speech. And in the past few months, we've seen those two reverse, which tells you just about everyone is a free speech hypocrite. Very few people can really stand it when it's their political enemy who is demanding
Free speech is great when it doesn't cost anything.
Exactly, yeah.
Can we get some questions? And where's the microphone? I can't, the lights are pretty bright here. Send up a flare if you're by the microphone. Okay, great. I see a hand over there.
Hi, John White, one of the master's students in the MPH and resident at the hospital. Great conversation. Thank you for being here. Chris Hayes wrote a book, A Siren's Call, about how the media often doesn't talk about things in long form. And I saw your articles, A Zombie Democracy. It's kind of a attention-getting letterhead, but we often don't have long debates about real issues, such as like crime in Chicago and that horrible Charlotte incident. That's horrible that this guy was let off and committed murder, or how even in California we can't even build a high-speed rail. And so I feel like for a lot of Americans, they don't feel like the government works.
Let me just, and I don't mean to be rude, but I should have said this at the beginning. The questions end in a question mark. Sure. And try and get to one.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I guess, do you feel like the media plays a complicit role in kind of this polarization? Because in order to get people to read their article, they have to say more and more controversial statements, rather than most people don't feel that strong on either side about issues.
If that one's for me, it is true that we're in this Darwinian struggle for attention, which is maybe the most valuable resource in our media age, and it's very hard to get it. I have to say, though, that I don't think it's fair to accuse a magazine that publishes, 2,500 or 3,000 word essays of simply throwing out clickbait in order to get eyeballs, because otherwise we wouldn't be doing it the way we're doing it. Does most of the country not feel very strongly? I'm not so sure. I mean, I know there's a kind of nice general position that if most of the country just wants us all to get along. Well, yes, but they also behave as if they don't, because of how they vote and what media they do watch.
This thing is poison.
Yeah.
I say as I put it back in my pocket. But the business model of these social media platforms is to keep us online and engaged, and their great inspiration is that the thing that does it is anger and resentment and outrage, and it's pretty darn effective. And it drives us into our silos, and our views in those silos are always affirmed but not necessarily informed. And everybody outside the silo is alien and threatening. And it is tearing the fabric of our country apart. And that's what we should be outraged about.
And the antidote.
And that is the description, by the way, of the Hungarian media environment.
I got one.
I mean, literally.
I got one person clapping there.
That was good.
Well, and the antidote.
Saying, okay, I got to get to my phone.
The antidote is talk face to face with someone you deeply disagree with, and read a book, and preferably a book with paper. And I know that here, that's what they have you doing. So if you are reading books here at the University of Chicago, you are helping to save our democracy.
And let me say, our goal here at the Institute of Politics is to host those conversations. It's one of the reasons we exist, and we have to have them. And we have to approach each other with some humility and some desire or willingness to try and understand each other. But anyway, I'm sorry, now I'm giving speeches. Go ahead.
Hi, Krem Tazan, second year master's public policy student. You all had mentioned, the economic insecurity that leads to the rise of these sorts of figures. What's it going to take then in terms of, perhaps economic issues, or maybe not, maybe social issues, for them to sort of fall out of grace? I mean, farmers here in America are struggling, businesses, all that, people are feeling the hardship, but are still kind of not caving in for the support of their leaders. You mentioned in Hungary with corruption as well, but he's still kind of in power for the most part. So what do you think is that threshold?
Well, it's a great question. And I actually think the answer to your question is a little bit related to the conversation we were having about social media, which is, I think the answer to the question has to be about community building. I mean, one thing Viktor Orban does an incredible job at, really as a political matter, it's amazing to watch, is he has a political apparatus that is heavily invested in building community. They go out and they have picnics in the countryside. They sit down and they really make an effort to connect, not on election cycles, but connect people with their party.
Right.
And I think that matters.
Yes, especially at a time, as George says, when people are sort of looking for community.
Right.
I think that is true. I will say, you have to. I mean, right now, I'm not in the political strategy business, but there are districts all over the country that are being pummeled by these tariffs. And you would expect the representatives in those districts to stand up for their constituents, but they can't because they've surrendered their agency. Those are issues that should be raised with people, because I don't know that people are making those connections.
And then the question, I'll be brief, but the question is, we've always thought, well, the economic cycle is going to affect how people vote. They'll vote their pocketbook. That's like an old law of American politics. How true is it in the age of absolutely polarized partisan?
But there is a connection between sort of how certainly Democrats have talked to that party. The party of working people has talked to working people.
Sure.
That if you approach people disrespectfully, even if it's unintentional, and if you sort of judge, I mean, the problem is, I said this, Franklin Roosevelt had a coalition that had, Southern rural voters, Northern liberals, and Unionists, and they produced the most progressive program, even though they literally, violently would disagree on some issues, because he stuck to those issues. And so that's not to say that we shouldn't be interested in social justice. When Franklin Roosevelt passed Social Security, it left agricultural workers out, and that was a lot of the African American working population. He knew that, but he said, let's get the program started, and then we'll go after that. Right. So there needs to be some sense of what is the thing that unifies the most of us, that are primary to our lives, and let's go after all the other stuff, but let's not make that an impediment to getting the big thing done. Yes?
Hi, Cyrus Sarafi. I'm a first-year public policy student at the Harris School. A couple questions. The first is very quick, though. For Mr. Pressman, just do you have any recommended reading for, speaking of books, for someone trying to get a better sense of the Hungarian situation and trying to look for parallels with what's going on in Washington?
I do. I mean, there are a lot of people, including a professor at Princeton, Kim Lane-Sheppel, who have written extensively. I think Anne Applebaum's work, including on Hungary, is really telling. I think increasingly, and you see this in the New York Times, the work that M. Gessen is putting out describing this phenomenon is always insightful.
Thank you. And I was told I can only ask one question, so I'll leave it to the next guy.
Hi, I'm Julia Martin. I'm a first year at the University of Chicago. Little bit of background, I was in the military for 6 years, and I do want to challenge just the idea that only people with a ton of luxury are talking about democracy and government. I do think that we have an incredibly different view on it. So if coming from the view of if it is a luxury to be able to consider politics and democracy in a social setting, how do we make that and other forms of political education and access to voting and understanding why you need to vote more accessible, especially without coming off as a liberal and naive elite?
Yeah. Can I just, first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
And it's inspiring. I accept everything that you say. I'm not suggesting, I mean, what I said before is what I believe, which is that for these people, survival is the first thing. And for a lot of Americans, things are a scuffle. Things are a struggle, and so that's going to be their main focus. It's also true that, to the degree that they think none of this political stuff really matters to their lives and their particular problems, that's a failure. And so you have to make these connections. And I'm saying just make it, I'm not saying don't talk about democracy, but connect democracy to the things that are important in people's lives. And that's a challenge. And listen, we have a big election coming up next year. Hopefully everybody, we generally don't get big turnouts in midterm elections, but, people should feel a sense of gravity about this election because of what we discussed earlier. There are a lot of people in Congress who don't feel they have the agency or the freedom to represent their constituents or exercise their Article I responsibilities. And that should be a concern to everybody. But let us all also emulate your example and take service and commitment to our country seriously.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Daniel. I'm a second-year MPP at the Harris School. First of all, George, I loved The Unraveling. Just wanted to say that was one of the most memorable books I've read. So just wanted to compliment you on that.
Thank you.
Second of all, you've been asking kind of the question of why American elites have capitulated so quickly. And I just wanted to offer a hypothesis and get everyone's take on it. I guess my thought is there's no more culture of kind of character and integrity and shame in a lot of American society, so people can kind of act cravenly self-interested and not have to worry about being, shunned or looked down upon within their social circles. I mean, like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, these are people who shouldn't be in polite society, let alone commanding our political and economic engines. And yeah, I guess that's kind of just my hypothesis, and I'd be curious.
There has to be a cost. And I think that baked into the calculus of elites in this country is a view that there's not a cost to capitulate. And until that cost-benefit calculus shifts, where individuals feel like they will be held responsible for their actions that are having a deleterious
and
impact on our
what form will that
institution.
take? What form should that take?
I think one of the forms that it takes is identifying individually. You still have, for instance, at major law firms in this country, some of the leaders of the Democratic Party of law firms who have capitulated to Donald Trump remain partners at those law firms. So what form of, clearly they feel comfortable remaining a partner at now a captured law firm. So those individuals.
A different form of cancel culture is what you're saying.
It's not cancel culture, it's holding individuals accountable for their actions.
Well, I don't want to get into a side debate here, but aren't economic pressures, general strikes and boycotts of these guys are all in business. People can stop patronizing their businesses. I mean, one of the things we're all addicted to is getting little boxes at our doors, for example, that we could go back to going down to the store down the street and buying stuff. I mean, aren't there things more than just sort of point at people and
No, of course. I mean, look, I think there was a movement when the law firms began capitulating for general counsels of companies to begin trying to redirect work to those firms that were fighting, and that was important. So it's not only on the negative, but it's the cost-benefit calculus on both sides.
I actually think lifting up those who have resisted is a more effective tactic. One more question, if there is one over there.
Hi, my name is Jacob. I'm a fourth year in the college.
And I'm sorry for everybody who didn't get to ask one.
Ambassador, you talked about the fact that Peter Magyar, you didn't say how likely you thought it was that he would win, but you implied that he could win. And I found that interesting given Orban's hold on the institutions. And so this is a kind of a wider question, but it can be answered specific to Hungary, which is how effective is the ballot box as a tool against authoritarians?
Yeah, great question. Let me answer that with a story, which is in Hungary at present, you can vote, you can go to the ballot, you can cast your ballot, and you can, and if you're voting for a mayor, for instance, whichever mayoral candidate gets the most votes will become the mayor. Now, is that a democracy? The question is what happens once a community decides to elect an individual who's the mayor, who's from an opposition party? And one of the dynamics I saw as ambassador is, and there was one village in particular, it was a village of 420 people. I visited it. This village had elected through a fair election an opposition mayor. And immediately upon electing the opposition mayor, the sole business in that community lost all of its state funding. So basically jobs were put imperiled. The next year, that mayor was subjected to a tax investigation over $1,000, and that investigation lasted for 3 years. So the ballots are counted, and whoever gets the most votes will win the election. But the consequences of electing someone who is not favored, someone who is from an opposing political party, are enormous, severe, and personal.
Can I end on a more hopeful note than that?
I got a more hopeful note than your hopeful note. But go ahead.
Elections are as dicey as you say, Ambassador, but they also can be shocking and overturn years and years of dictatorship. Think about the Philippines under Marcos and the snap election. Think about elections in Republic of Georgia, in Poland, in Venezuela, where they were overturned, but everyone knows who won. And an election, the reason why today's dictators still hold elections is they know they need some legitimacy. And it's the election that gives them that legitimacy. And without it, they become very fragile and vulnerable. So I'm gonna hang on to that as the last redoubt. It's the last stand.
Right. Well, I'm gonna quote you again. I will say this, as you tell the story about the mayor who won and then got punished, and his community got punished for winning. I think New York City is about to test that proposition.
Familiar.
Yeah.
And Governor Mills in her exchange with President Trump, the threat to withhold federal funding.
Yes. So in this book, in a more hopeful George Packer concluded by saying self-government puts all the responsibility in our hands. No strong man or expert or privileged class or algorithm can do it for us. As soon as we abandon the task, the common skeleton unknits and collapses in a heap of bones. All of this asks us to place more faith in ourselves and one another than we can bear. On some days the project seems preposterous and the effort exhausting, but I am an American and there's no escape. We've never known any other way of life. We have to make this one. So let's make this one. Thank you very much. Thank you.